Alright, so we got 4 more new releases to talk about, and not only are 3 of them pretty heavy, and I didn't mean to pair them all up, that's just kind of how it fell in place, but another thing I guess I should mention before we start is, I guess with all 4 of these, it's kind of hard to talk about these without going into quite a bit of detail, so I'm not entirely sure how spoilery this whole thing might be for all 4 of them, but like if these are ones that you want to go into like entirely blind, this probably isn't the video you want, so I'll just throw that out there now, and we'll kind of, if something's going to be addressed that's like spoilery, I'll try to say that as we go and come across that stuff. So before we get into the really heavy shit, let's go ahead and start with I Know What You Did Last Summer. This sort of legacy sequel, or if you're going by the Scream terminology, requel, I guess. This is actually, when you go by the requel definition, this is actually a pretty good example of that, where it feels both like a remake and a sequel. So, because for a very large amount of the movie does feel like a remake, even though they are addressing the events of the original movie. But obviously, of course, we're ignoring I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, which is a piece of shit, and has nothing to do with the rest of this. It was like the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers had been brought into this franchise for some reason, so luckily we're not even acknowledging that, nor is there even any possible way to, so... but I will say, going into this one, what was interesting was, even though, in most cases, I Know What You Did Last Summer is not a movie that was as beloved as, say, Scream, and hasn't been like as long-lasting. So I was actually pretty interested in seeing, like, it does seem pretty apparent, like, how it kind of felt like this franchise was kind of left behind, where Scream continued on, and how this was maybe them trying to have their, like, you know, Scream 5 moment, Scream 2022 moment with this one, and... yeah, that's actually, in many ways, that's actually quite obvious. But you can tell they're trying to do the sort of more self-awareness thing, where the interesting about it at the time was that Scream came out and it was, like, you know, the self-referential horror movie at the time. And then the very next year, also by Williamson, was I Know What You Did Last Summer, which pretty much played itself pretty straight. And kind of seemed like one of the movies that Scream would have been going after after the fact, after Scream's existence, interestingly enough. So this one kind of starting to lean into the whole self-aware thing to a degree. It's actually to a point to where there's enough mediocre stuff in this movie where sometimes I maybe can't tell where it's trying to be self-referential and where it just sort of is being something that would be easy to parody. So, like when the font alone comes up, like the way the title's written in the original movie kind of has this very recognizable way about it, like the style and the structure of it and all that. So this one is like, it just gives you this vibe, like it practically splatters on the screen, and it's like, it has this vibe of, okay, we know what we're doing now, we're gonna do the whole... We know what kind of movie this is, we know what you're expecting, and we're gonna try to give that to you. Just from the font of the title on the screen alone, feels like it's trying to go that route. And it's set near the 4th of July again, so it's all within the tone that, like, it's very much, you know, this sort of fan-servicey thing. Little did I realize going in how fan-servicey it was actually going to be, but I kind of underestimated it in that regard, which may or may not also kind of fall into what is ultimately a lot of its weaknesses, because I'm pretty forgiving towards the slasher genre. It's like one of my favorite parts of the horror genre. It's just the simplicity of the slasher movie. I've talked about that endlessly on this channel in the past. So I was actually pretty positive going into this. Like, I was really curious about it. It's like, what could they possibly do with this? What direction is it going to go? Is it still Ben Willis? There's a lot of questions going into it. More than you would think for a movie this simple. But, and it just... as far as, like, more about the vibe, I did find it interesting, the soundtrack choices. Now, I'm not really a music person, especially not a current music person, so I don't know if the music in this is current or not, but I can say that the soundtrack that plays throughout it feels very, like, late 90s, early 2000s. And so I found that to be an interesting choice. And then the cast, something about it felt a little in that vein. It feels like a modern cast, but I also kind of felt like I was watching, like, Sorority Row again. Like, the bad remake of House on Sorority Row, which is already not that great. But that's a video we've already done on this channel. But, yeah, so it begins and we meet, like, this new cast of characters, and they get into very similar circumstances. They come from very similar backgrounds, also, which we know is going to be a driving force for the decisions made, as was the case in the original movie. And so we're going to get, like, a lot of awkward exposition. There's one point in time where, like, there's a set of characters giving exposition about another set of characters that's standing right over there. And those characters are literally just standing there in silence while we get their exposition. It's like they're just presenting themselves to us. And so stuff like that is going to feel really awkward and clunky just going into it. But once again, it's like is that on purpose thing? I don't know. Typically I'd probably be more inclined to give a movie like this the benefit of the doubt in that regard, but I don't think I was feeling that with this one. That benefit of the doubt wasn't there as much. But at the same time, it becomes apparent, especially when the initial incident happens, that the movie knows that it knows what we know. So it's going to try to play with our expectations and do stuff like reverse the circumstances of the initial incident, where it's the young cast that's in the middle of the road, and it's the car that comes that has something terrible happen to it that they more or less have to keep secret. And just right away, it's one of those things of, like, you can kind of understand the circumstances in the original movie enough, where it's like why they make the decisions that they do, and how unexpected things happen, and they made choices in the moment that they immediately regretted but then had to live with. And then it spiraled from there. Here, it kind of immediately starts in that place of, I feel like they're making this a lot more complicated than they need to. I feel like this isn't, let's take it to our grave secret. I feel like there are ways to work this out, but I guess we're supposed to continue under that vibe of, oh, they're acting in the moment, they're young and they're high and all that. They're high now in this one instead of drunk. That's one of their updates, I guess. But, yeah, and I don't know. So that right away sets the vibe at, I guess we can keep looking at where they're going with this, but especially how they're going to work in our previous cast members with Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr., and it's pretty much as expected. Jennifer Love Hewitt is in this probably about as much as Neve Campbell was in Scream 5. Freddie Prinze Jr.'s got his David Arquette seasoned Dewey beard going on. They kind of got that Dewey-Gale relationship where we know they were together, but now they're separated and going off that, and it's like, is there still something there or what? It's all very, you can really tell somebody saw Scream 5 and 6 and were like, I really think we could try this with I Know What You Did Last Summer in some way, but they didn't really branch out on their own thing. It feels like very familiar territory. It's sort of suffering what it suffered in 97 when Scream came out in 96, so it's just history repeating itself a lot. And so, like I said, there are moments where they try to shake things up a little bit. There is a moment where our main girl, Ava, has her first time face-to-face with the fisherman, and it's this kind of great moment where it seems like it might be one of those fake-outs, where it's like, oh, this isn't what it actually looks like, and then it's like a false scare. And then, like, no, it's a face-to-face run-in with the fisherman, just happening very abruptly. Again, that also kind of brings me back to a moment earlier this year in Hard Eyes. It gave me a very similar reaction, but still, it's a good and effective moment. And then there's stuff like they throw in something that we haven't seen in this franchise before, but again, we did see, and not just in one of the recent Scream movies, the very first scene of the very first one, that really effective scene when Drew Barrymore's dying and she pulls the mask off and it cuts away just before we see, and it's like she knows who's killing her. This movie does that as well, but if anything, it's less of an effective moment and more maybe a little too revealing. Like it plays one of its cards quite early, which is kind of surprising in retrospect. And then as far as like updating it goes, really the only thing that feels particularly updated after a while is the hopefully you know what I mean when I say this, Gen Z vocabulary. Is kind of here, and it's like, and it feels very much. It doesn't really feel like natural dialogue. It feels like, oh, one of the ways we can update this is to make the Gen Z characters talk like Gen Z, but it feels very sort of deliberately written as an update to a movie from 1997, rather than, like I said, the way the characters would actually interact. But it also depends a lot on references to the previous movie. Now, normally I'd be, okay with this. Like, I feel like the word fan service can be overused and people can kind of overreact to it when it's more of just, like, establishing that we're still in the same world. I do like when franchise movies do that, especially when they're later in, like, the timeline. Where I like feeling like we're still in the place that we were in whatever the last movies were. But I mean, there's a lot of that in this, like to the point where, like when I say it's almost too obvious, would be moments like when they're in the cemetery, and they're calling back the previous victims of Barry and Helen and Max, but the way they do this is Barry, Helen, and Max are all like right in the same place in the cemetery. So that the characters can have those moments, and it's like just moments like that, which don't really necessarily mean anything, but like I said, when you're looking at it as, oh, this is purely just to make a reference to the first movie, then you think like, well, Barry and Helen, maybe because they were a young couple, but why the fuck would Max be here? Max didn't even like any of them. But it's whatever. It felt very much like, hey, do you remember this thing and that thing and all that? It's very funny to me. It's fucking stupid, but it's very funny to me that I don't know where the hell this comes from, but when a movie makes when a franchise movie makes a lot of references to previous movies, basically just to cash in on that, people call it like member berries. I don't know where that term comes from, but it was just very funny to me that that's the term, and this movie is literally repeatedly asking member Barry. That's very funny to me. There's also a moment here that's definitely fan servicey, and yet somehow maybe given involvements. This is where I guess we're kind of getting into spoiler territory a little bit. If you don't want to hear too much, from here on we'll probably be saying too much, so I'm just throwing that warning out now. The big cameo that happens that is both like, okay, I'm sure it'll get, a big reaction, but it's also kind of not surprising given, who else is in this movie, so it's like this person is already pretty much right there. But how they were going to shoehorn this in, like how could this person possibly be in this movie? The way they find it is very forced. It's like, it's nice that she's here, but it felt very much like this scene does not need to be here. So there's that. And once again, normally it's something where I could probably ignore that if it's a cool enough moment, and if it's a nice enough surprise, but it felt very forced. But I do like well enough what they tried with the new cast, where they actually have moments where like typically you would think like, okay, we're probably just here to see the original cast, we don't really give a shit about these new people. They do what they can. Again, sorry to harp on this, not as immediately drawing us in as the new cast members in Scream 5 and 6. But we do have moments where they try to flesh them out, and they throw in, like, these comedic moments that are kind of awkward, but still human enough, like when it's revealed that Ava has a kink, and the dude she's with having to give himself a pep talk in the car, trying to psych himself up in order to help her with this. Is kind of an unexpected moment, but one I actually don't mind, I guess, because it's character. Like, they're real people here doing something. They're not just here to be, killed off. So it's something, but it's all kind of for naught anyway, because at the end of this, nothing is really adding up. And to talk about that would be to talk about how, regardless of any benefit of the doubt you would be giving this one as it's gone on, both endings just really make things fall apart in a really big way. Okay, so first of all, we do, like, an attempted Scream ending, where the killer is revealed, and then suddenly the performance goes way over the top. And then it goes to a predictable conclusion. There's the moment where we think it's done, but then a character says, "It's okay, it's over." And in every horror movie ever, when a character says it's over, there's one more ending coming. It never fails. So we have that, and then we get this second ending, and you want to talk about things falling apart. I will say, what's interesting, and I'm probably being cryptic for no reason here, because if I say as much as I'm saying right now, I might as well just be saying the spoilers outright. But I'll stay cryptic for the sake of it. But, so when this killer reveal happens, I was surprised to find that regardless of how convoluted the motives are, one is pretty much just as convoluted as the other. You only really needed one, but okay. I was surprised by the performance. It's like, I think this person might be doing the best acting here they've ever done. I'm genuinely surprised by that. But with that said, again, it kind of feels wasted because this doesn't... Okay, here's the thing. I was of two minds of this second reveal, because what happened was I was thinking about, they haven't really touched on I Still Know What You Did Last Summer in this whole movie. They've only focused on the first movie. So it was like, I went in under the impression that they were making it a trilogy now. It was the original movie, I Still Know, and this one, where this one follows I Still Know. But by the time we got this whole way through the movie, I was like, I think they retconned I Still Know, because there's been no reference to it whatsoever. I think we're just doing this direct off the original movie. And based on that, I was like, if we are retconning I Still Know, this reveal makes a little more sense. As long as I Still Know is retconned entirely. So it's like, okay, I can kind of vibe with this, I guess. It's still an incredibly convoluted motive, or motives, but okay. It doesn't feel completely out of left field, I guess. And then we get confirmation during the credits that I Still Know is, in fact, canon. So I think that's where it really fucked itself, was that one moment where they confirm I Still Know is canon. Because if I Still Know was not canon, I feel like this reveal would not have as bad of a reputation as it's probably going to. So, and the idea, and that's not even to mention the way they leave the first reveal hanging in this really stupid way right before the movie ends. It's just like suddenly, like, it was already, oh, I don't think I'm on board with this, I don't think they quite accomplished what they were going for, but it is, it's a slasher movie, so as far as expectations for that could go, it's not like it's terrible, necessarily. And then this last 10 or 15 minutes just really just goes off. And it's like, oh no, I think especially based on the last 10 or 15 minutes, this might technically be kind of a bad movie, which is unfortunate because it was just kind of this harmless slasher going on for a while, but wow, they just really, I don't know what the hell happened, but yeah, that last 10 or 15 minutes like really kind of becomes the nail in its coffin. So I don't know if we're gonna do this thing that's teased or not. I don't know where we'd be going, but I don't know. But I still know being canon now, it just raises so many more questions, but I'm not near as interested in them as I was when I started this one, when I said I had a lot of questions. So that's what happened there. So let's go on to Eddington, which I was already excited about just based on the fact that it's a new Ari Aster movie, which is basically an event. And it's like, but the idea of Ari Aster doing a movie set when COVID really started taking off and everybody was losing their minds and starting to hate each other in all these different ways. And I was like, okay, so Ari Aster taking that and doing his thing with it, I'm really curious where this could go. And it's the thing of, like, it seemed much more straightforward compared to his other movies. And then it premiered at Cannes, and the reactions were basically saying, yeah, this is totally an Ari Aster movie, and it does get super weird after a while. And I was just getting, like, I was really craving this movie because I was like, so I understand how a movie like this with this premise can escalate, but how is it going to escalate in an Ari Aster way? Because that's a totally different monster. Yeah, that's, I can say I'm not disappointed, I guess I could say. So, looking at it from this perspective of these characters, where we start, where we've got the sheriff with Joaquin Phoenix, and we've got the mayor with Pedro Pascal, and they're on other sides of this COVID war that happened. So, I don't know, this is a lot to dredge. It's weird how, like, so fresh and recent it feels. How it feels like, it's like, well, I guess with the way people spiraled, and the fact, that, COVID is still out there, and if it's not as extreme as it once was, but and the fact that there's still variants and all that, still something is like, the fact that we're like 5 years out and this movie is like technically a period piece is insane. But the idea also of like just dredging up everything, where it's like when you just kind of feel that exhaustion all over again watching this play out, and it's like talking about this on camera, which we didn't, we don't talk about current events on this channel, so it's like, I guess I have to address this now, and it's like, the way people react to hearing certain things, I don't know, but I guess what the direction we can go is a question and a criticism that came out a lot about this movie when it hit Cannes was, what is Ari Aster's point of view? And it's like, does he even have one, or is it just fuck all this? And while it would be easy to say and think that Ari Aster's approach to this would be just fuck all of this, I think it's pretty clear he's got, a stance to a degree. It's the idea where we've got the Phoenix character and the Pascal character on two different sides, and while Pascal's character is certainly not perfect, he's very much a politician in every regard. The bumbling and obtuse nature of Phoenix's character, and the way he increasingly pays for his decisions in very absurd and ultimately quite funny ways. Funny in that Ari Aster sense. I think, and another thing would be, there's another thing we can go into that's a later and more revealing, but yeah, I think it's pretty clear from the get-go which of these characters is more unhinged as we go. But once again, it is an Ari Aster movie. Everybody's unhinged to one degree or another. So Especially when we see Phoenix's home life, where he's got his wife Emma Stone, and then her mom, who is like all down the conspiracy rabbit hole. Like these ludicrous conspiracy podcasters are basically the soundtrack to their home, because his mother-in-law is basically living off of this and being shaped by it. And we see moments where he's like scrolling through his social media, and you can just see the whole thing of how like through social media you basically decide what you hear, and then when that's all you hear, that's the rabbit hole you end up down, and that's what your brain becomes. And you can see all of this playing out, and it's like you kind of can see even though we're kind of dropped into it, we were there, and we can sort of see again like how the unraveling kind of was already there, and then it just like really rapidly went out of control. And it was basically the insanity was basically able to build off of COVID and become significantly worse and more insane and make people hate each other even more, and doing that whole thing. So that's where we are with that. There's also the fact that talking about things that were previously here, even going out of like real life, as far as the containment of the movie, there's also this underlying grudge between Phoenix and Pascal that was also already going on. So there's things like that that's sort of building up the tension also as it goes, and how you can take these moments that are real and we actually witnessed, and then there's moments like these that are like personal to the particular characters in the movie, and how those went through the same thing, how there was something that was already like festering that just got worse and worse with what was going on here and the way everything escalated. And like I said, it's the darkly comedic approach that Aster has. There might be some people that watch this that don't even remotely crack a smile. And then there'll be people that watch this that are cackling. And I'm somewhere in the middle. I think there are things in here that are hilarious in this very dark way. But it's like his other, especially like Beau is Afraid, where one thing that was really apparent there was, if you're going to be into this, you kind of have to be there with Aster from the beginning. And it's like if Beau is Afraid was like his first movie for you, you probably already feel totally stranded and distant. And so with him here, it's like, even though this might be, believe it or not, tame by his standards, I still very much feel like it's a case of either you're already along for the ride with him, or you're completely at a distance. And whether that has anything to do with how you view the characters, it may surprisingly be not as much as you would think in regards to how you're going to be into it. I think it's much more of an Aster thing than anything else in regards to how you're going to view it as you go in. And I think that's really impressive for a director to have that much of a hold on his work and a very specific style that's either you love it or you hate it. To go into this material that was already divisive and continues to be divisive, but it's like the content of like what's going on in the story that we know from real life feels like it's not even the divisive thing. It's the, are you for Ari Aster or are you not? As a filmmaker, and his style and the way he embraces the weird and goes as far as he possibly can once that material is established. So, yeah, if that makes any sense, I don't know. I always feel like we get kind of deep and lost when we talk about Ari Aster's movies, and I personally love that. But yeah, but it might sound incoherent coming out, but whatever. And like I said, as far as neither side being perfect and Pascal definitely being very much a politician, one of the first really funny scenes that I can remember is a campaign ad for Pascal's character that is just so... one thing that I remember Aster saying that he wanted to do with this was embrace the absurd as much as possible. And that's very quickly apparent. And this campaign ad, there's a point in time where he's playing piano in the middle of the street. And that's that's like the third or fourth absurd thing that's happened in this ad. That becomes very funny. And then there's also when Phoenix starts running against him and does like his own sort of smear tactics, and he has completely covered his car in these absurd slogans. And there's one like over the tire that says like "you're being manipulated," but it's the wrong "you're." It's Y-O-U-R. And it's like, just that alone, without anything else, if it was just that, that would already say so much about the character and the circumstances. But it just gets more and more ridiculous as it goes. But the thing about what Phoenix is doing here also is that, because we only actually get Pascal sparingly. Like, it's very funny to me that people are giving Pascal a lot of shit because he's in everything, but like, so much of the stuff that he's in, he's used surprisingly sparingly. It's like, it's more of like, you know, he's more of like a marketing tactic than anything else, even though like everything he does has been, his performances in particular have been great. We talked about that with Materialists, where I said I'm not sick of him yet, despite him showing up in so much. But to lean more towards Phoenix and what's going on here and what he's doing is, he's really kind of where that line is of the whether it's being absurd and whether it's being funny and whether it's kind of being sad and tragic. And it's like, he's got this way of being so sure of himself in one moment and then like nearly unwatchably pathetic in others, depending on the circumstances and where this character's going. And it's like, you can just sort of feel this uneasy line happening. And it's like, how he reacts is going to become more and more crucial to how these events spiral. And so, like, there's one moment in particular that felt almost like Travis Bickle-like in regards to when I said unwatchably pathetic. The famous scene in Taxi Driver where the camera moves away from him because you can't even watch Travis Bickle in this moment because it's so pathetic. He has several of those, but Ari Aster's camera, of course, is not going to shy away. In fact, we might even bask in it. So, and the way Phoenix is able to play that, but also a character that feels increasingly unpredictable, is going to make things really uneasy. But like I said, as uneasy and as uncomfortable as we get, the darkly funny nature is always going to kind of be in there, especially with his character. And even when, like, you know, things are getting super, super dark, it is, like, the darker it gets, kind of the more absurdly funny it starts to get. But also the more bleak it gets at the same time. This is what we're talking about with it being, like Aster really having a stamp. And to me, that's a good thing. Once again, very, very divisive filmmaker, to say the least. But I'm kind of on that side where I feel like I'm with him regardless, and I can feel like everything just feels like it's kind of working for me. So there's other characters that come into this, like the Austin Butler character, who's only here again for like 1 or 2 moments, and just in this moment in particular, when he's at the house, Austin Butler's an actor I've been championing for quite some time, and it's another one where it's like, you can go ahead and put him in everything, I'm not sick of him. And that's especially the case with him, because he especially really has a way of disappearing into characters. And this one is no exception to that, where he perfectly he's also the perfect casting choice of this guy. He's like this religious cult leader, and how cult leaders have to have that charm where people can, you have to, like, that charm and the confidence where it's believable, even though we hear him talking and we know that, like, this guy is so absurdly full of shit. But the way he plays it, it's like, yeah, I can immediately get how this guy could be charming enough to, like, you know, how people can be sucked in by him and follow him and all that. And he's got that perfect kind of charm to where he can be that guy that we know is weird and full of shit, but also it's like, I also get it. I get how people can be pulled in and deceived by this person. And even in little moments where it's like the way he has command and that confidence where, like, he sits down without being invited, and then he goes inside the house without being invited, and Phoenix just kind of has to watch this happen, and he just kind of controls the space. And the fact he's able to do this with, like, really just this one scene, and it's like, yeah, if he were brainwashing people, I believe that they could be successfully brainwashed. So just that, I really appreciate it also. So, I guess now we can get into the territory that's probably saying too much, but I also don't want to go into the spoilers, because if we go full on into the spoilers, I feel like we'll be talking for another hour. So I'll try to condense this by not saying too much, but when we do reach this moment, this turning point that takes us into the second half, where things really have escalated beyond belief and then go farther and farther from there, that's when it kind of takes off into this spiraling territory of, oh god, just how far out of control is this going to get? Just how much is Aster going to make this an Aster movie? And where the fuck are we going to end up? And first of all, I guess one thing to talk about in regards to, does Aster have a point of view? And it's like, so what is going on here? I think it's clear. What's interesting about it is I think it can be interpreted in a number of ways. Who another set of characters is that comes into this, that comes in pretty late, by way of a jet. And I've seen some debate already where there's at least three different ways to perceive who these people might be and what they stand for. And some people have thought that it kind of contradicts what was set up before. There's some people that might think it's a bit too dismissive of, like, oh, there's, like, this particular area is really, really bad, and now this one is equally bad, so just everybody sucks. But I think, to me, the one I've landed on is that there is one thing going on in the background of the whole movie that doesn't get a lot of attention, but just enough to let us know that it's there. And that alone, I think, kind of proves the point of all of this is kind of being, like, not to sound too into the conspiracy thing, but there is a power that's, like, above all of us that just doesn't give a shit about any of us regardless. It doesn't have a side. It's just, we are what we are, and we're in a comfortable place, and however much of the people below us just die, it doesn't matter as long as we churn on. And that's what's going on here in the long run, and that's something that feels very much like, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds accurate enough. So, that's the way I look at what's going on here when the carnage really ramps up and this mysterious other group sort of comes in. So, that's how I can see that, it being vague enough. And as far as where Phoenix's character ends up, if you want to talk about being both bleak and dark humor, and that balance that Aster always finds. What I really liked about this was, like, and you could see it as, like, you know, karma and a comeuppance of sorts, but it's like, the darker and more bleak it gets for this particular character, is it becomes increasingly funnier the more bleak it gets. It reminded me a lot of the last 10 minutes of A Different Man, where the more bad things and bad luck that happened, just the funnier it became, and the more absurd it became, and it's and the way that it's unexpectedly funny, to just watch everything come crashing down. And that's, yeah, it's very clear in pure Aster fashion. It's, like I said, you could say it's going to be divisive because of what it's about, but I think it's the Aster style still that's going to be the most divisive thing about it, which, like I said, I kind of love. And the fact that, you know, COVID itself is, like, still such a fresh thing, and the division is still very much apparent, so it's like, how this plays in, like, the future will be something I'm really interested to see, and I'm kind of excited to find out, so that's, I don't know how much I've said, if any of it makes sense, if I got anything across, but it's just that kind of movie. You just kind of have to pour it out. Like I said, if we went into, like, the details, even more detailed than we already did, we'd be here for, like, another hour. So maybe, like, down the road during a live or something, we'll have more of that conversation. But in the meantime, let's go on to Sovereign, which we're not really letting up in heavy material here. So with Sovereign, this one is especially heavy because it's specifically a true story to a degree. I feel like you can kind of tell where creative license was brought into this, but from what I read up on, for the most part, it seems like a lot of the details of the what actually happened are here. It's just kind of the in-between stuff we kind of brought in some dramatic flair. So, what's interesting about this movie is the focus on the Nick Offerman and Jacob Tremblay characters, our main characters. Where he is a father that's doing the whole sovereign citizen thing, and he's roping his son into, you know, all this ideology and stuff like that, and this whole, like, I'm still not quite sure what the fuck these people think or what they do, but I have seen, you know, like, videos of, like, whether it be, like, police body cams or videos that they've uploaded themselves feeling like they're in the right and wanting to get their message out there. And the confrontations happen very much like Nick Offerman's confrontations in this, like, practically word for word. Where he basically feels like, to put it, like, simply, for somebody that still doesn't quite understand it, he's following his own laws because he doesn't feel he's under the the government has the right to have any sort of power over him, something to that degree. Mainly, he's basically makes up his own laws as he goes, that basically play into how he feels about how he views the world, and everybody else is going to have to deal with it and follow along with him. And so that also means obeying laws is not something that he is particularly fond of. So, going on that, and he goes around and does, like, these seminars and kind of ropes impressionable people into this also. And of course, naturally, as it would happen, a very effective public speaker. So, of course, he's going to be very powerful to certain groups of people who kind of feel like they're in this place. And this is what the movie does well, is it feels like it's, like, right away not completely damning of him necessarily. It's definitely not damning towards the people that sort of start to follow him. Because, you know, you're looking at people who are at this place, they're basically at the end of their rope, and it's like they feel betrayed by everything, whether it be, like, government and banks and stuff like that. So it's like, these people are in an understandable enough place, but then it's like, once you get to that place, you can become very susceptible to being persuaded to go in some dangerous directions, which is what this guy does. So, and the fact that the humanity that it does bring him also, and I think a lot of that is through the great choice of having this movie basically through the main perspective of his son, Jacob Tremblay's character, Joe. And I think that's a really great way to keep Offerman's character humanized, his character Jerry, as somebody that we don't immediately see as, like, a caricature, or somebody that's, like, you know, inherently evil in a sense, is to see him through his own child's eyes. Because the thing about it also is, on the surface, before we really get down into it, they appear to have a great father-son relationship. Like, they get along, they're, like, understanding of each other. And it's like, you get the feeling that they're there for each other. They've been through tragedy, losing, he lost his wife and their baby, so they've both had, like, this unimaginable loss that they've gone through together. And so you really feel, like, the love between them, and the relationship between them. While at the same time you also see this impressionable kid being shaped as we learn more and more about his character and what he stands for and what he does to impressionable people and how he tries to shape them into his viewpoint. And so, in the way we see the troubles they're going through, like being foreclosed on and bank issues and stuff like that, and the way that he sort of like, it's almost like a disguise in a sense when he goes to these seminars where he speaks, where he and his son wear like these really crisp white suits, and it's like when they walk in the room you imagine they're like these really rich people. You wouldn't think they're people that are like being foreclosed on and live in this house that's like practically been gutted and has things out in the front yard and is having like all these issues with banks and stuff like that. And the way they sort of put that on, and then the way we see like this sort of human side to them, behind this sort of these people that do these seminars and make these speeches and stuff like that. Like we get the sense that we can see where he might have come from and how he got to this point to a degree. And I think that's going to work a lot as far as the perspective goes of it not just being like, you know, this guy sucks and like everything he does sucks. Like we get that vibe quickly that he's off and what he's doing is really fucked up, and if everybody lived by his ideology it would just be total and complete chaos. Like it's like it gets to the point to where, like I said, if you've been in a down enough place, it's like there are things about what this guy says that will make sense and seem like the way to go. And that's where, like, that, as far as being a public speaker and getting more people to believe this is kind of where that comes from. What we were just talking about with the Austin Butler character in Eddington, and how easily it can be to just sort of be shaped when you're needing a direction to go but don't have one. And so, like, there's just a whole underlying humanity there, if that was a concern that something like this would be a bit too straightforward and, you know, who's good and who's bad. Because another great thing this movie does is it has the other characters, the cops, who are Dennis Quaid and Thomas Mann, and they have their own parallel story going on, but we already know how they're going to intersect. I don't know how many people know this, like, actual real-life story, but yeah, these two groups of father and son are destined to converge in a really tragic way. And so what I like about this was it was reminding me of a movie that I love. So I say this comparison with complete affection. It was reminding me of Patriots Day, in how that movie, the Peter Berg movie, separates this sort of action of the movie and like the sort of thriller angle with the real-life tragedy and the real-life victims and survivors of it. And I feel like this handled that in a very similar way that made Patriots Day so effective. How it was very respectful to the real-life people who didn't come out of this well, and was able to make, you know, this sort of, you know, simmering thriller without it feeling insensitive to those people, and really showing, like, just how human they are. And what's especially human about this story is that you could say that Quaid and Thomas Mann are on, like, the good side of things, because they're, you know, they're not lawless, unlike the Offerman and Tremblay characters, who is this guy that's, like, lawless and is shaping his impressionable son and other people to go down a really, really bad road. All coming from him basically just trying to make his own reality. But what's interesting about that is that when you look at the relationship between Quaid and Thomas Mann, it's very cold and very distant, and it feels like there's not a lot of affection in it. Like, it's literally a theme where Quaid is trying to tell his son to not pick up his crying newborn because it, like, makes them too soft and stuff like that. A very Dennis Quaid character. And then, like I said, over here, especially in the early scenes, Jerry and Joe seem to have a pretty solid relationship between them. And it's pretty, like, supportive. And so having that sort of contradictory dynamic between where these characters are morally, but how they are emotionally, is towards each other especially, is a really interesting way to shake this up. And like I said, makes everybody feel human in a way. Like, even though, because where they stand morally in the story, the fact that Quaid and Man have a sort of cold relationship with not a lot of emotion in it ends up making them seem more human, when you would think it would be the other way around. But like I said, the way we've established where they are morally in the story, it makes all the characters much more interesting to see that they're on opposite sides in several different ways. And in one case, quite unexpected when you look at the circumstances. So, as far as, I will say, just right out, that Nick Offerman is award-worthy in this. Everybody is great. Like, and it's... Well, I'll make that point after this. As far as Offerman being award-worthy, he has that way about him, like I said, we were talking about with Butler in a sense, where he's got that sort of confidence where, like, whenever he says something, regardless of how full of shit it sounds, we fully believe that he fully believes it. And he does fully believe it. And the way he's able to do that, but also do these things and say these things that are so contradictory and hypocritical, and it's like, in one moment he's saying one thing, but then in, like, the next moment he could be saying something that feels like it's completely doesn't line up with what he previously said, and it's like where his beliefs lie. And that, well, like I said, also just being able to make the character feel human, but also just make him more and more hateable as it goes. But then these moments will sneak in where, like, they're in the back of the van and they have this talk about the mom and the baby, and it's like, and we're kind of revving up to the third act when this scene happens, and it's like, it's always dropping these moments to make sure to show you that these are, like, that everybody's a human being in this scenario, regardless of where they are. And that just also ends up making the tragedy all the more tragic when it hits. But it's like, when we get to a certain moment, and he says, he's doing one of his talks, and he's saying, like, you know, I don't condone violence. Like, we are not about violence. We never do violence. And then just, like, in the same breath, he immediately follows that up with, but if I had to, I would shoot somebody if I had to, and then I would not be able to stop. And so, like, he's, while saying he doesn't condone violence, he's really laying, as they say, the quiet part out loud. And it becomes clear more and more, like, what it's actually probably about for him, at the end of the day. But like I said, even though we can see the contradictions and what's probably really, what he's really actually about and what he really hopes will come to be, still, when he says, like, I don't believe in violence, we don't do violence, you believe that he does believe that, even though he's not seeing the contradictions. And to make that, all of that feel real is really impressive and must be really hard to do. So that's fantastic. With that being said, like I was saying, the fact that it seems like we're seeing everything from Joe's perspective, I feel like is the way to take with this and really adds to the humanity to it. And what I really love about this performance especially is Room was, believe it or not, Room was 10 years ago. So when Room came out, and Jacob Tremblay was just this very small child who gave this incredible performance, once again, was basically the lead of that movie, there's always expectations to carry with that. And a lot of times, and not even just talking about, you know, the child star rabbit hole, which is a whole other dark thing we could go into, but as far as, like, maintaining the talent and being able to show it as, you know, he becomes a young adult, there's no, like, disappointment factor. It's like, this is basically what that kid that was in Room promised would become of his career, is still giving performances like this as he's growing up. And like I said, seeing all this from his perspective and the fact that he's in this place where he's kind of trying to go down one path, but he's also, like, the question we keep asking throughout is he at a point of no return in how much Jerry has shaped him? It's like, or is he going to be capable of maybe going down his own path? And this more promising path that he's kind of putting himself on, that, like, you know, despite his dad, and playing that sort of, you know, internal battle in so effectively, and how we can kind of see it even when he's like not speaking, just through like expression and emotion. And it's like in this fixation that he has on the neighbor girl, all this stuff that's like not even has any dialogue, and we can just like see all of his struggle. So he's I'm like putting like all this praise on Offerman. I want to make sure to note that, you know, Tremblay is like his equal still. And it's like standing his ground with the, you know, big performances from his, you know, famous co-stars with Offerman here and Brie Larson's Oscar-winning performance. He's really capable of holding his own still, which is just really fantastic. So, and still very promising to see what else he'll do from here. So, as far as there's another side character with Martha Plimpton who comes in, and she's great as well, as she always is, with her limited time. But she's also, not only does she kind of bring in this sort of, well, it's also kind of a combating thing, because there's like a warmth to her, and when you see her, it's like, oh yeah, you can kind of see like, this is that, because, you know, the mother is gone, it's like, this is the kind of warmth that, you know, this small family's been kind of missing now. So it's like there's this sort of completion that's maybe coming back into play when Plimpton's here. But then there's moments where they're having conversations and Offerman's going off and she's validating everything. And it's like, that's, again, when you get in your bubbles and you can see how this stuff just continues to build and build, and people get farther down their own rabbit holes inside their bubbles. And it's like, then there's this sort of uneasy quality that comes back into play, even though she's been kind of a small warmth that's come into it. And that's another thing where it's like I said, it just feels human at the end of the day, while also scary and tragic. So, and that's, I guess I don't really have to go into too much else. I guess what I can say is, as far as how it handles the ending, where I was making that very affectionate comparison to Patriots Day, and I think it's the same thing here too, where it's like, it could potentially be off-putting that we follow Jerry and Joe through the whole movie, and then once the main moment happens, the moment, like I said, surely you maybe heard about in the news at one point, the movie just kind of seems to leave them behind for its final moments and focus on the, like, victims and survivors of what happened. And that's another thing where it's like, I actually love that. I love that they just kind of focused on who they should be focusing on at the end of this story, and that's where we leave off. And leaving on this moment where Quaid gets, like, this very effective emotional arc. That's really, I feel like that, like, I was into this movie through the whole time, and was really engaged with it, and I feel like this is one of those ones where the way it ended, like, really brought it home in a way that it needed, that really puts it up at that extra level. So I'm really happy with this, as, like I said, very sad and tragic it is. And speaking of sad and tragic, we're not getting any easier with our subject matter. We're going to end on Eric LaRue, which is the directorial debut of Michael Shannon, which is what really drew me to this to begin with, before I even knew, like, what the story was, or the fact that it's based on a play that came from, like, I think it's from, like, the theater group that he co-founded, and, like, that's where that play comes from. And these are, like, all the behind-the-scenes people are, like, his people, like, his creative, you know, group, and that's how this has all kind of come to be. I think it's, like, from, like, way back in, like, 2002 is when the play, like, first came to be, and obviously it's just now as relevant as ever. So, and it's a great leading role for Judy Greer. I love when these actors or actresses that are kind of known for, like, these supporting roles can come out, especially in these indie movies, and just have, like, she's like the main center of this movie, the emotional center, like, just everything. It's all about this character and how she's reacting in a very interesting way, which we'll talk about. But I was just psyched alone to see Judy Greer get such a showcase part and get to be the center of a movie. So that alone. But the fact that she's playing a grieving mother, grieving in the sense of her child is still alive, but he was the perpetrator in a school shooting. So this obviously has a lot of territory that we know. It's worth noting right away also that I mentioned that the play's from like way earlier than all these things I'm about to mention. But like when I first heard the concept, I immediately thought like, oh, it's like we need to talk about Kevin comes to mind, and obviously very recently Adolescence comes to mind, especially where it's like where we're kind of watching the family deal with the aftermath of this. Like they can really be sort of companion pieces, that last episode of Adolescence and this. But talking about this as its own thing, and seeing this character and the way she's portrayed, and it's like, it really feels like hopefully you'll know what I mean when I say this as we continue to talk about it. But like, it feels like the main tragedy here is how unaddressed the Judy Greer character is, and how isolated she is, given her circumstances as the mother of the child that did this, and the fact that these things can happen, and sometimes it may possibly be a case of it doesn't always come back to how you were raised or how how good or bad of a parent you were, and it's like sometimes other things come into play, or sometimes just something that's completely out of control can happen, and it can be something that is as shocking to you as it is to anybody else. But the fact that there's going to be no sympathy for you as the parent, and she's stuck in this place where just everything is shut off. And she kind of also shuts herself off for understandable reasons, but the way, like this, an early scene where she's grocery shopping, and we can just, like, feel her disconnect. And, like, there's moments where, like, the backgrounds get kind of blurry. There's a moment where there's, like, a haze around her constantly. And there's a moment where she's at the store, and she's in the gun section. And it's like we can only vaguely tell out of focus in the background that she's in the gun section, and that's what's kind of stopped her in her place. And then it starts to come into focus, and like just as the guns are about to come into focus, it cuts away. And it's like it kind of puts you like really in that mindset of where she is and what's causing her to have these emotions, or in some cases maybe seemingly lack of emotion, but also just like the surreal feel. Like there's this first interaction that she has that we see out in public is just like this really surreal. It's almost like, at first I almost thought it might have been a dream sequence or something, because it just felt so off and disconnected, but it's like it's just her just kind of floating through life. And just like feeling everything and nothing at the same time, I guess, in a way. And by the way, it's all up to Greer to convey all this, like as far as like physically, emotionally, with dialogue, without dialogue, and like every note feels like it hits. Like it's one of those cases of like, why did it take so long for somebody to give Judy Greer a part like this when she's always clearly been capable of this. But there are side characters and a pretty, stacked supporting cast. Like Alexander Skarsgård is her husband, who's taken another path here. He's gone down the super religious path. We might say toxically religious path. And he's got, plenty of... He's a very painfully uncomfortable person as well. Like, not just necessarily what he's been through. It's almost like it's... You can't really tell if it's like... this is how he's reacting to his circumstances, or if this is the way he's always been, or if he's one of those people that just kind of got an extra push into the personality that he is now. But he's not going to be a helpful husband in this scenario. It becomes very clear very quickly. And then we have Alison Pill, who's kind of on his side of things, and who he kind of you know, finds consolation with. And she's like, it kind of feels like an extension of her character in Snowpiercer a little bit, where she's like also kind of toxically religious and feels like has a very unhinged way about her, but it's like she's kind of exactly what he's looking for right now, so that's only going to further push him down his road and only make everything more distant and isolated for her. Another thing that's backing them is this sort of like evangelist played by Tracy Letts, which is amazing for a number of reasons. Is Tracy Letts is just amazing in general, and then the idea of him playing a part like this and just really chewing it up, and knowing his background with Shannon, with Killer Joe and Bug, just everything about Tracy Letts' presence is always pleasing. And him going down this path now lately, late in his career as an actor, and like every performance he gives is incredible. I get so psyched every time I see Tracy Letts show up in a movie. There's also Paul Sparks, who's like basically the one person that's on Judy Greer's side, but he's also not as helpful as he would hope to be. He's like the pastor that's trying to get her to have a meeting with the mothers of the kids that her son killed. And it's in this place where it kind of feels like Mass, which came out a few years ago. But definitely in sort of a different circumstance. It's much more about them trying to make this meeting happen and debating if this meeting should even happen, rather than the meetings themselves necessarily, until they actually happen. And of course they're going to have their own dramatic depth when they come, but I feel like it's much more about sort of anticipating the possibility of these meetings that really brings the sort of tension and dread of, especially that this character feels about what her next stepping stone could possibly be to some kind of healing. And so it's, and the fact that like the one guy in her corner is this guy that's like always seeming to try to like stay positive and smile at a time that just doesn't really call for positivity and smiling, and a guy that seems to have an awful lot of trouble reading the room. He's doing what he can, but it's, again, like everything in her life is just not helpful. And it's what I think it especially plays up well here is the fact that how she has to deal with it when her own feelings are so insignificant to everyone in her life. Like, anybody related to the victims does not want to hear about her feelings, understandably. Like, she straight up told her face, what you feel does not matter, by one of the mothers. And then there's, like I said, her own husband is going farther and farther down that religious rabbit hole, and he's just mentally and otherwise, he's just gone. He's in his own world. And it's comes to a head here, and maybe this is saying too much about the ending if you don't want to know, but at the end she finally goes to see her son in prison for the first time. And she's kind of finally in this place where she kind of lets everything out and she puts everything on the table. And then her son proceeds to tell her everything that's bad about the inside of the prison and how hellish it is in there. And he says, like, you know, okay, you're having a hard time, but, you know, I'm worse off than you, essentially, is what he's saying. And so, just, like, when you're just dismissed by everything around you, even if it's, like, the last sliver of what you think might take interest in how you're feeling and might help you to find some healing, and it's just, there's just nothing there all around. And that's just this really powerful feeling. And like I said, the fact that she has to make all of this come through in this character, with it not being like this big blowout, you know, of a performance. Like, think about this. Even the play and the movie about her is not named after her. It's like, even then, her son is the talking point. Her son is the title of the movie. That has to be intentional. And so that's a brilliant move, assuming it's intentional. So that's, so yeah, just portraying that, is this outlook that I feel like it's something, like I say, it's like, it's something that, you know, we don't see portrayed enough, and it's like, yeah, because it's understandable that so many people would think that she's insignificant, but it's like, somebody should hear her. Somebody should know how she feels, and she, you know, has this right to healing with the information that we know about her. That this was just as random to her as it was to anybody else. But because she's in this position, she's basically the only character in this that doesn't have that. Because even her son, you know, still has her affection. But she's just got nothing. She's just abandoned by everything. And so the fact that this is like her story essentially being told gives it this whole other layer of, we, the audience, are the ones that hear, and we're the ones that are feeling with her to a degree. And so it's a very, it's a great story to tell, and a great approach to take to telling that kind of story. So, and a very, unsurprisingly, a very impressive debut from Shannon as a director. He's one of those people where it's like, when you hear about all his creativity, where like he's done all the theater, and he has a band, and he's like one of the great actors of this generation, and it's like, you know, of course he was going to be a great director too. And he's got all that experience behind him and all the other directors he's worked with, and it's like everything was sort of leading to him having a great debut, and I'd be curious to see what else he might want to do as a director. So I guess that's what I can say about all these. So we'll go into like Superman and Jurassic World and stuff that's much later, now that we've gotten these done. So and we'll continue on until we get to our fall stuff and our award stuff and our October stuff. So until all that, I think that's it.